Asvapati's been seeing this emergence of life in or out of matter or in matter, simple material beings. And he says that the impulses that those little primitive beings experience, the urge to survive, to enjoy as much as possible, that is still driving our lives. No? These passions are the stuff of which we are made. This was the first cry of the waking world. It clings around us still and clamps the God, prevents the God in us, the divine part in us, from growing, from emerging. So I'm going to start reading from there. Even when reason is born and soul takes form, in beast and reptile and in thinking man it lasts and is the fount of all their life. This too was needed, that breath and living might be. The spirit in a finite, ignorant world must rescue soul, its prisoned consciousness, forced out in little jets at quivering points from the inconscient's sealed infinitude. Then slowly it gathers mass, looks up at light. This nature lives tied to her origin. A clutch of nether force is on her still. Out of unconscious depths her instincts leap. A neighbor is her life to insentient naught. Under this law, an ignorant world was made. In the enigma of the darkened vasts, in the passion and self-loss of the infinite, when all was plunged in the negating void, non-being's night could never have been saved if being had not plunged into the dark, carrying with it its triple mystic cross. Invoking in world time the timeless truth, bliss changed to sorrow, knowledge made ignorant, God's force turned into a child's helplessness, can bring down heaven by their sacrifice. A contradiction founds the base of life. The eternal, the divine reality, has faced itself with its own contraries. Being became the void, and conscious force, nescience, and walk of a blind energy. And ecstasy took the figure of world pain. in a mysterious dispensation's law, a wisdom that prepares its far-off ends, planned so to start her slow aeonic game. A blindfold search and wrestle and fumbling clasp of a half-seen nature and a hidden soul. A game of hide and seek in twilit rooms. A play of love and hate and fear and hope continues in the nursery of mind its hard and heavy romp of self-born twins. At last, the struggling energy can emerge and meet the voiceless being in wider fields. Then can they see and speak, and breast to breast, in a larger consciousness, a clearer light, the two embrace and strive, and each know each, regarding closer now the playmate's face. Even in these formless coilings, he could feel matter's response to an infant stir of soul. In nature, he saw the mighty spirit concealed, watched the weak birth of a tremendous force, pursued the riddle of Godhead's tentative pace, heard the faint rhythms of a great unborn muse. You like to start?
Even when reason is born and soul wakes from in beast and reptile and thinking man, it lost and is the found of all their life. This too was needed that breath and living might be.
So it's referring to the sentence before. No? This was the first cry of the awaking world. What Aswapati has been seeing, these primitive little creatures, not even fully alive. No? So that those instincts and those that push, it clings around us still, even when reason is born and the soul begins to take shape. That still is there, it lasts in beast and reptile and in thinking man. It lasts and is the fount, the source where their life comes up like a fountain. That very first primitive struggling life. And he says this too was needed. This is a necessary stage. That is what King Aswapati sees. He sees anybody else seeing it would say, this is not worth to become. This life is not worth living. But he sees that it's part of a much greater movement. This too was needed, that breath and living might be. Alice?
The spirit and finite rescue, so its prismed consciousness forced out in little jets at quivering points from the inconscience sealed infinitude. Then slowly it gathers mass, looks up at light.
Yes. So he says that this is the way in which spirit manifesting in our world which is not infinite and eternal, which is finite and which is also ignorant. It doesn't have full consciousness. It's still groping in the darkness. No? This is the way that it has to rescue, to set free its consciousness, the consciousness of spirit, which in our world is imprisoned in matter. And the spirit has to force its consciousness out, like little jets of steam or water coming up out of rock. At quivering points where that spirit consciousness is being forced out, there's some life happening as it is forced out from the inconscious, sealed infinitude. There's something infinite about the inconscious, the emptiness, the void. So that's how the spirit does it. It forces its consciousness out in these little jets and spurts here and there. And then slowly it gathers mass, more and more of it. It becomes stronger and stronger. And then that consciousness can look up towards light, a consciousness which has more light. Tone.
May I ask first a question?
Yes, please do.
It's about line 299. Even when reason is born and soul takes form.
Yes.
My question is there, can you say anything about the connection between soul and
Reason.
reason? Yes.
Well, soul, obviously, from what we are told, is beginning to take form, even from these little jets, at the very beginning. But as the forms become more complex, they're capable of expressing and experiencing more consciousness. So certainly the development of reasoning mental beings, of human beings, is a big step forward in the development of soul. The soul, the divine spark, is there, even in the stone and everything. No, it's the divine presence is there in everything. But with the beginning of life, its possibilities for expressing and experiencing and growing become much more. And then the soul experiences all these different animal forms, which we will read about in this canto. This is all a process of development. Gradually, it becomes what Sri Aurobindo and Mother call a psychic being, a distinct, not just a potentiality, but something that has a form and an individuality. So I think that's what he's speaking about here. When his reason dawns, it's not necessarily that reason wakes up the soul, but it is a new possibility of individualization. and the soul takes form. Yeah, is the
soul already there?
The soul's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The spirit is there everywhere from the very beginning. So you were going to read, Don?
This nature lives tied to her origin. A clutch of never force is on her still. Out of unconscious depths, her instincts lead. The neighbor is her life to insentient naught. Under this law, an ignorant world was made.
So he's been speaking about the manifestation of spirit in a material world. This is the way that spirit, fully conscious spirit, has to rescue its consciousness. So this nature that we know, what we think of as Mother Nature, Mother Earth, material nature, it's alive, it lives, but it's still so much connected to its origin of inconscience, inertia, inconscience and inertia of matter. So this nature that we know is tied to her origin. And even when life wakes up and there are living beings, there's this clutch, this tight hold of nether force, of this ignorant or inconscient force, purely material force from below, that's holding tight onto her still. One of the forms that the spirit's consciousness takes is instinct. But nature's instincts, they kind of leap up out of a state, the depths of unconsciousness. And the life of nature is very close to the nothingness, without any senses, without any consciousness, without any possibility of movement, the nothingness of the beginning. So it's in this evolutionary way that this ignorant world has been made, under this law of gradual emergence of the powers of spirit in matter. Lorraine.
The enigma of the darkened past, in the passion and self-loss of the infinite, when all is plunged in the negating void. None being's night could never have been saved if being had not plunged into the dark, carrying with it triple mystic cross.
Mother's made a drawing of this triple mystic cross. I've opened it at the page there. The enigma, the mystery. This enigma when everything was dark, was made dark. When the infinite, the eternal, lost itself, deliberately or otherwise. It's a mystery. Everything was plunged into this emptiness, which was a huge negation, saying no to all existence. He tells it like a story, that complete darkness of nothingness, this night of non-being, could never have been saved if some power of being hadn't plunged down after it into the dark, carrying with it its triple mystic cross. And the next lines will explain about this cross. Leila.
Invoking in war time the timeless truth, bliss changed to sorrow, knowledge made ignorant, God force turned into a child helplessness, can bring down heaven by their sacrifice.
Yes. So we've heard about this fall, haven't we? We've read about it before, about how the four great beings were sent to create a new world, the being of consciousness and truth and life and bliss. But on the way, they turned into their opposites. They cut the connection with the origin and they turned into their opposites. Here it's told in a different way. That as if somehow the nothingness, the darkness had come first. That had happened first, and then something from the Supreme Being had to go after it. And that being had these qualities of pure existence, perfect consciousness, perfect bliss and delight. But it sacrificed those qualities. What it's doing is it wants to invoke in the time of our world, our finite, non-eternal world, invoking in world time the timeless truth, the truth that is beyond time and limitless. How to do that in this fallen world? Bliss, ananda, changed to sorrow. Knowledge, perfect consciousness, turned into ignorance. And that omnipotence, that all-powerful force of the divine, turned into the helplessness of a little child. It's an amazing sacrifice. And that sacrifice can bring down heaven into our world. Fanny, would you read?
A contradiction found the base of life. The eternal, the divine reality has faced itself with its own control. It became the void and conscious force, nescience and walk of a blind energy, and ecstasy took the figure as world pain.
Yes. So it's another way of saying the same thing. The basis of our life is a contradiction. The eternal, the divine reality, the supreme, has apparently deliberately faced itself with the challenge of its own opposites. Deliberately, being became the emptiness, the void, the nothing. And conscious force, the perfect Chit Shakti, became nescience, unconsciousness, not knowing. And the walk, the movement of a blind energy, this unconscious material energy that we perceive as the basis of everything. So being became the void, conscious force, Chit Shakti, became nescience, and this blind, unconscious energy, and ecstasy, bliss, Ananda, in our world, took the figure of world pain. How and why could this happen? Joel, would you read?
In a mysterious dispensation slow, a wisdom that prepares its far-off ends, planned so to start a slow aeonic game.
Thank you. So there is a kind of law, a law of a mysterious dispensation. Dispensation is a word that we use about the divine, the creator. This is the way he set up his game, like this. But it's a mysterious way. Why is he starting his game like this? The one who's setting up the game for him is the supreme wisdom, or wisdom. And that wisdom is preparing the end of the game, the very far off, distant end of the game. And so this is how she starts it, with this law of opposites. I was watching a nice film the other day about a young girl from a very poor background, a slum child from Uganda, became an international chess champion. And one of the things that she could do was the capacity, somehow she had this miraculous capacity to see from the beginning of the game how it could work out. No? So this wisdom is like that. It sets up the pieces in a certain way and sees how it can work out to the desired result in the end. And it plans to start this slow game that's going to take eons, millions and millions of years to be played. And then he describes the game in another way, Ganga Lakshmi.
The blind fall search and wrestle and fumbling theirs of the half-seen nature and the hidden soul, the game of hide and seek in twilight rooms, the play of love and hate and fear and hope continues in the nursery of mind. It's all the navy romp of salad-born twins.
Yes, so it's a nice way of describing the game. The players are blindfolded. They can't see each other. They can only feel each other. It's like the game of blind man's buff. They can feel and then they have to guess who is there. So these two people, or two beings who are playing, one is nature and the other is soul. Nature we can half see, soul is hidden. And he says this is a game of hide and seek. Sri Aurobindo has used this image in other places, that this is the great play between the divine and nature, God and the soul. It's a game of hide and seek. So in the material world, especially in this early stage of life, they're playing this game in twilit rooms. They're not very brightly lit, dim rooms. And that game is still going on. This play of love and hate and fear and hope continues, he says. It's going on in the nursery of mind. the nursery where the children play. But it's the beginning of mind. And this is quite a violent game. It's a hard and heavy romp of twins. They belong together, they are born together, they are very closely connected. But they play like this, quite violently.
But Shraddhavan is very interesting. Someday I see the film about Elizabeth I d'Angleterre and Mary Stuart. Is exactly the description of this soul and nature. It's incredible. 2 hours is a secret in the story. It's so marvelous.
So this game is going on in us, in our world. No? But it's going somewhere. Something is going to come out of this game. Sarojini, you would read?
At last, the struggling energy can emerge and meet the voiceless being in wider fields. Then can they see and speak and breast to breast. In a larger consciousness, a clear light, the two embrace and strive, and each know each, regarding closer know the parent's face.
Yes. So if this game continues, it goes on, even in mind. But at last a stage comes when that struggling nature energy can emerge, become more conscious, and meet that silent, pure existence in wider fields, no longer in these twilit rooms. Then they can see and recognize each other, speak, embrace in a larger consciousness, a clearer light with much more consciousness. The two, we can say, Purusha and Prakriti, or we can say Ishvara and Ishwari. They embrace and they still struggle, perhaps, for which will be mastery, but they know each other. Each of them recognizes the other when they look more closely at the face of that one who is their playmate. Then they recognize. So that's the game that's going on as our world evolves, as spirit emerges from matter, as nature becomes more conscious. Kamala.
In this formless volume, he could feel matter's response to an infinite stir of soul. In nature, he saw the mighty spirit concealed. Watch the winged birds of a tremendous force. Pursued the widow of goddess, tentative face. Heard the faint rhythms of a great unborn music.
Yes. So this is back to King Aswapati. He, even in these formless coilings of the early life forms, writhing like worms in nature's mud, he could feel what is happening there is the response of matter to the first movement of soul. Life is beginning to awaken. So he's able to see that hidden in all this nature with its strange expressions and apparitions, he sees the mighty spirit hidden behind, which is making everything happen. He sees that tremendous force, that supreme divine Shakti, just beginning to wake up, to begin to express itself in these feeble early forms. And he's able to see the path that the evolving divine being is taking, slowly, tentative, step by step, trying its way, slowly. He sees those steps. And he hears, faintly, he can feel the rhythm of a great unborn muse. A muse is an inspiring spirit who inspires the poet or the playwright to create some beautiful masterpiece. Sri Aurobindo was a poet, so he was hearing these faint rhythms of some marvelous poem, the poem of the creation of this world. He can faintly hear them beginning when he sees these feeble beginnings of life emerging from matter. So all these pages since the beginning of the canto, from page 132, have been talking about this emergence, this painful, difficult, slow beginnings of emergence of life in matter, from matter, becoming more and more independent. And perhaps we wouldn't see any meaning at all in the development of these slimes and molds and single-celled creatures and so on. But Aswapati is able to see that this is all part of a huge plan which has been planned by the supreme wisdom in a particular way for a particular reason. And he sees it also as this play of the Lord and the Mother, the Supreme and his conscious force. So next he will write about the animal creation. And then at the end, the first emergence of mind in living creatures. All this is part of the kingdom of the little life. So we'll stop there for today.
So first is reason and then it's mind.
Sorry?
First is reason emerging from matter and then it's mind. Mind is later.
No, I don't think it's quite like that. Now we are not actually talking about the development of mind at all. We're in the kingdoms of the little life. Life is just emerging from matter. More complex forms will come, and with them more and more consciousness, more conscious capacities. And only towards the end of this canto, he shows how first faint beginnings of something that we could call mind consciousness starts to emerge. But then he doesn't follow that line. We go on about life for several more cantos, and it's only in Canto 10 that he shows us the realms of the little mind. That's what we're reading on Sundays at the moment.
So the reason you were mentioning today is
He says that at the beginning there are these instincts. Because spirit is trying to emerge, the little beings, they feel that they have to survive. And maybe to survive, they have to eat their environment, the beings around them, or whatever they can find. No? But those instincts that are there at the very, very beginnings of life, they're still in us, even when reason is born, even when beyond reason the soul takes form. Those instincts are still very, very influential in all our life movements. That's what he said. Does it make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that there are very different degrees of whatever. So when he says reason today, it's something like a very basic.
So human beings have come to a level of reason, and we tend to think that because we have that power of reason, we are the lords of creation. No, we're the kings, the highest species. He reminds us that beyond the power of reason, there's also the power of soul, which has been taking shape slowly all the time through all these developments. And even when we come to human beings who mostly have developed reason and who are carrying within them a fairly fully formed soul, not yet perhaps the fully developed psychic being, but some psychic spark is there, which can't be there in animals. It can't be fully formed in animals. Even then, these instincts of the lowest forms of life, we're carrying them in us. That's basically what he's saying here. And that's because it's all been this play, this game from the beginning, no? The emergence of spirit in matter, or from matter. From complete unconsciousness and inertia to something more dynamic that will come in the next section. And then not only dynamic, but perhaps some clearer light of consciousness. But all the time, the whole thing has been happening because of this play of the two in one, the Lord and his conscious force, playing their many, many different roles.
Even when reason is born and soul takes form, in beast and reptile and in thinking man it lasts and is the fount of all their life. This too was needed, that breath and living might be. The spirit in a finite, ignorant world must rescue so its prisoned consciousness, forced out in little jets at quivering points from the inconscience sealed infinitude. Then slowly it gathers mass, looks up at light. This nature lives tied to her origin. A clutch of nether force is on her still. Out of unconscious depths her instincts leap. A neighbour is her life to insentient naught. Under this law, an ignorant world was made. In the enigma of the darkened vasts, in the passion and self-loss of the infinite, when all was plunged in the negating void, non-being's night could never have been saved if being had not plunged into the dark, carrying with it its triple mystic cross. Invoking in world time the timeless truth, bliss changed to sorrow, knowledge made ignorant, God's force turned into a child's helplessness, can bring down heaven by their sacrifice. A contradiction founds the base of life. The eternal, the divine reality has faced itself with its own contraries. Being became the void, and conscious force nescience, and walk of a blind energy, and ecstasy took the figure of world pain. In a mysterious dispensation's law, a wisdom that prepares its far-off ends, planned so to start her slow aeonic game. A blindfold search and wrestle and fumbling clasp of a half-seen nature and a hidden soul. A game of hide and seek in twilit rooms. A play of love and hate and fear and hope continues in the nursery of mind its hard and heavy romp of self-born twins. At last, the struggling energy can emerge and meet the voiceless being in wider fields. Then can they see and speak, and breast to breast, in a larger consciousness, a clearer light, the two embrace and strive, and each know each, regarding closer now the playmate's face. Even in these formless coilings, he could feel matter's response to an infant stir of soul. In nature he saw the mighty spirit concealed, watched the weak birth of a tremendous force, pursued the riddle of Godhead's tentative pace, heard the faint rhythms of a great unborn muse.